Hi guys, welcome to another episode of Hashing Out the Law. My name is Arash Hashemi, as you know. Today I have with me guest Heidi Brown, Professor Brown actually. Uh, Heidi is a professor at Brooklyn Law, is that what it is?
Yes, Brooklyn Law School.
Brooklyn Law School. And she has written two books that are available on ABA and on Amazon. And she's written another book which has two volumes.
Yes, a legal writing book.
Right. And she concentrates on helping lawyers dealing with stress and all the other things that go along with being a lawyer. And in fact, it's funny, I was reading your bio and you had a anxiety of public speaking when you were in law school and everything, which, believe it or not, is common in a lot of lawyers. And it just doesn't go well together because if you're going to be a lawyer, especially a trial lawyer, you need to have public speaking skills. So welcome. Could you tell us a little bit about how it started and how you got to where you are today, please?
Thank you. Thank you for having me, first of all.
My
So
pleasure.
yes, I went to law school right out of college and I loved research and writing, but I was afraid to speak. So people might say, well, why did you go to law school? I still loved the research and writing and studying. I was a really good student in college. So I just thought if I just kept putting myself in situations where I had to speak, the fear would go away. But it didn't. So I got through law school. I ended up going into construction litigation, which was a really hardcore, intense mode of litigation. I loved my job, but I was scared for literally 15 years. So I had to take depositions and go to court. And I honestly kept thinking that the anxiety and the fear would go away, but honestly, it didn't. And what changed was I started teaching. And I noticed that my best legal writing students, so I teach legal writing, that's my specialty. I was a brief writer at the law firms. And I noticed in teaching that my brightest students, my best legal writers, were also the most afraid to speak in class or do oral arguments. So I finally thought, okay, I have to study this because I thought there was something wrong with me for 15 years of law practice. And now I'm seeing these amazing students grappling with this issue as well. It doesn't mean that we're all not cut out to be lawyers. It just means we need to understand, untangle our fear, understand, are we introverts, are we extroverts? Can we both types of personalities excel as lawyers? And I found that yes, we all can do this. We just need to understand our anxiety a little bit more and then have mental and physical techniques to step into these performances feeling stronger about ourselves.
Right. I'm going to backtrack a little bit. Let's go back to when you were a lawyer in construction law and you were doing depositions and everything. You said you were scared for 15 years. Could you describe that fear? I mean, I understand having butterflies, but how scared were you? What was the feeling every time you had to do something that involved public speaking?
It was pretty bad, I'll admit. So as I mentioned, I did construction law. So our cases would take about 2 years to go to trial from the time we filed the complaint to the time we went to court. So we had a lot of depositions, lots of discovery. And so I was going out to take these depositions and I was really prepared. I had read all the documents. I had put the depo outlines together. I had my little binders of questions, but I would walk into the deposition and it was usually me and about 7 or 8 other lawyers, usually men in the room. And I would just have almost panic attacks because I was afraid of what they would think of me or that I wouldn't, if they objected to my question, I wouldn't be able to respond quickly enough. I also have a really robust blushing response. So when I get scared or nervous, my face turns really red and I get really blotchy. So that would happen in the depositions and I could tell that they noticed and I thought that made me look weak. So I used to wear like turtlenecks and scarves and all this stuff to kind of hide my weakness. Of course, it didn't hide it. It just made me feel short of breath and hot and sweaty and suffocating. So I really kept putting myself in those situations without knowing anything about why this was happening to me physically, but also mentally and emotionally. And that lasted for a really long time. Depositions, anytime I had to negotiate, and I don't want to give the wrong impression. I was intellectually and substantively prepared. I knew what I was doing, but it was this mental and physical manifestation of the anxiety that just constantly got in my way. And I didn't know enough about myself and also the science of it to help myself until I started researching it for my students.
Right. Did that old trick, imagine everyone in their underwear, ever work?
No.
No?
Either did fake it till you make it. I have heard it all. I've heard just do it. Like I could just put on a pair of Nikes and feel powerful. No, that doesn't work for this scenario. Fake it till you make it does not work. The imagining everyone in their underwear does not work. I have tried everything.
So let me ask you this. What was the turning point? What event or what day? Do you remember the day where you decided I have to do something about this?
It was really in my law school classroom where I was the teacher. And we had to, in our legal writing course, make our students do oral arguments. And I could see in my students the same terror that I had. And I felt awful because here I was, the professor, doing sort of the rite of passage. Everyone who goes to law school has to do an oral argument, right? Like everyone should want to do that. But I saw that some students had the same fear of doing it. And also I could see that they felt a little like imposters, like they don't belong here because they aren't excited to do it, or they look nervous. And I wanted to change all that. So that's what really made me realize I needed to study this for myself, first of all, but then figure out a way to really be able to teach law students, but also lawyers, how we can just take a step back and really, we have to get to know ourselves a little bit, which can be a little uncomfortable. But it was that realization in that classroom that I thought, I have got to research this, not only to learn about myself, but to be able to tell the future lawyers of our country, you are cut out for this. You can do this. You do not have to avoid law school, or you don't have to avoid litigation or choose a certain career path just because this stuff is hard for you. We can figure this out.
So how did you start researching? Did you know how to start? Did you have a starting point or?
No, I love to write, and I really wanted to write about this topic. So I just started researching books about shyness and social anxiety. And what was really shocking to me, I mean, I'd always heard the term introversion and introvert, but when I started researching anxiety and shyness, I discovered a whole body of research about introversion and extroversion, which is totally different from the concept of shyness and social anxiety. So I started researching first the differences between introversion and extroversion, which has nothing to do with anxiety. That's just how we as individuals process energy, interaction with other people, how we perform our best work. Like I'm an introvert. I'm actually doing okay working at home right now. I like quiet. I'm an independent worker. That's totally different from the fact that I have social anxiety. So the fear of public speaking and the turning red and the shyness was completely different from being just a naturally quiet person. That was a fear of judgment and a fear of criticism. So my research took sort of these two paths. One was understanding how quiet individuals and introverts, the assets that we bring to the legal profession, but also how certain scenarios can be harder for us, like we're not the first ones to speak in a meeting, for instance. We're not the ones raising our hand in a Socratic classroom or in a board meeting or whatever, because we're thinking. Totally different from us who differently struggle with social anxiety or shyness or fear of public speaking. That you can be a confident extrovert in your personal life, but have professional fear of public speaking. So I had to sort of research and understand myself those two different research paths.
And once you realize that, and you realize that these are two different things, what was your next step?
I started writing, I think back then I started writing 2 law review articles that really to try to help law professors understand that just calling on students in a law school classroom and expecting them to be able to jump right into, a Q&A, a quick Q&A, some students are going to struggle with that, but it doesn't mean that they aren't cut out for this. They just need to, I like to call it, learn how to amplify our voices authentically, because I mentioned the faking it. I tried to fake extroversion. I tried to mirror the behavior of all the lawyers on the other side of those scary deposition tables, but none of that worked for me. So I had to figure out my own quieter litigation voice, and then also train myself mentally and physically to amplify my voice in my own way when I needed to. So it started off being 2 articles. And then sort of once I got my feet wet with the research, I really wanted to write a book about this because I read, as I mentioned, a ton of books to do my own research, but I couldn't find a book that had framed this issue for lawyers and law students. So that's when I decided to write the first book of this series now, called The Introverted Lawyer.
I have a quick question. I'm going to sidetrack a little bit. So you started researching and you realized that this shyness, it has nothing to do with being shy. It's about the fear of being judged. I'm paraphrasing, by the way. And then you did your law review articles. At what point did you become comfortable doing public speaking? Was it when you first realized and a light just turned on, or it took some time? Could you tell us that journey a little bit, please?
To be honest with you, I still grapple with it and struggle with it all the time. I'm very open about it in my books, about how I can be completely prepared to teach a class or to do a presentation, but for some reason my internal judgment kicks in before I'm about to perform. Even if I've given the same presentation 20 times, that morning I will feel that same sense of panic. I'll be like, oh, can I get out of this? Why do I say yes to these things? But then now I know how to catch myself, and I have certain techniques that I do mentally, but also physically. But what I realized about how this is definitely working is because I am able to catch myself now. Even if those familiar feelings of anxiety come flooding back, I now know what's happening in the moment. Even if I blush, I can kind of control that more. And I can just remind myself, look, I didn't pass out or faint the last time. I'm not going to faint this time. Last time it went well. This doesn't have to go perfectly. I'm just going to go out there and do my job. And so to answer your question, I still grapple with it all the time, but now I know that I can do it and it'll be fine.
Right. It seems like you've trained yourself to be in control of the moment rather than letting the moment control you.
Absolutely. You said it better than I could possibly say it. It's being aware and realizing that you're just in another one of those moments. And then, yes, taking back control by really putting into action some techniques and mental and physical steps that you start to trust yourself that, okay, if I do what I did before, this is going to be fine, and I can connect with my audience and everything will work out okay.
Sort of like alcoholics live every day, day by day.
Yeah. It's every day. I know if I have a presentation, I mean, even honestly, before speaking with you today, I'm like, oh, okay, I gotta practice what I preach. I have these things I do to prepare myself. I stand in like a power pose there's a great TED talk by Amy Cuddy, Cuddy. She has this great TED talk about power poses. So I did that before even coming on with you today.
Well, you're doing great. You're doing great. So let's go back to the path we were on. So you write your first book, The Introverted Lawyer. Tell us a little bit about that book and what are some of your favorite things that you took from writing that book?
I realized that I love writing books. I love writing in general, but I love writing books. So with that book, I could envision the trajectory or the path of the book before I sat down to write it. And so writing is exhausting, but I get a lot out of it. So the journey of writing it, I wrote every day. It just became part of my life. And the book sort of has 3 parts. It starts off distinguishing between introversion and extroversion. And then, as we spoke of, distinguishing between introversion and then shyness and social anxiety. And then it points out the assets that quiet individuals bring to the legal profession, like listening, deep thinking, creative problem solving, thoughtful writing, and things like that. But then it highlights situations like we've talked about that can give some of us trouble, like interrupting in meetings and being really aggressive in certain situations. But then the next half of the book, or the kind of main thrust of the book, is this 7-step process that was really wonderful to discover as I was writing it. It started off as a 10-step process, then it became a 7-step process. And that's where I really worked out in my own mind what my process is. So, and just designing the book was really fun. It has, actually I have it right here. It has light bulbs on the cover, and you see there's 7 light bulbs for the 7 steps, but the introverted light bulb is on its own on the side.
Right.
So I just liked the process of working with the publisher to design it. Each of the little chapters ends with a quote and a little light bulb. And it was just a really, really amazing labor of love to write the book. And then I had a complete panic attack when it came out.
Why, you were afraid of being judged?
Yes.
Okay. And how was the feedback from people?
It was amazing. The book came out. In fact, I honestly, I got confused about the timeline for my publishing, and I thought I had one more round of copy edits. So I had gone away for the weekend. I came home and there was this box in my mailroom. I live in a high-rise apartment in Brooklyn, and there was this big box there, and it said ABA Publishing on it, and I realized it was my books, and I was terrified. So I carried the box upstairs and I opened it and I lifted out one of the books, and it looked beautiful, but I was so scared to open it up for fear I'd see a typo or something, you know. I turned to the back of it. I did read the back of it to make sure that that looked good, and then I gently put the book back in the box and didn't open it again.
Wow.
Yeah. Eventually I did, and the reception was great. A lot of law schools started reaching out for me to come and talk to their students. The book came out in the spring of 2017, and a lot of law schools do their oral arguments in the spring semester. So it was kind of neat because I started going around talking to law students who were about to do their oral arguments for the first time. And then that turned into doing some talks at some law firms for their summer associates, and then it just kind of took on a life of its own from there.
That's awesome. That's really good. You mentioned something while you were talking about interrupting meetings, and I remember when I was younger and I was sitting in a meeting or sitting in a discussion atmosphere, and someone would say something, and I knew they were wrong, but I was too afraid to speak up. And then when I left, I had this feeling, man, I should have said something. So how is that feeling with you, and when you were in these depositions? Was that something that burned, your inner souls after you left?
Yes, I so wish I could go back and redo all those depositions now, knowing what I know now. Yes, so a situation, and I don't know if this is what you experience, but for me, when that happens, even now, I'll be in a meeting and I'm hearing all these different voices, and I'm processing, as people are speaking around the table, and I'll, like you mentioned, I'll hear something that I disagree with, or that sounds wrong or improper procedure or something, but I'm thinking about it so much in my head that by the time I'm ready to speak about it, the conversation has taken a whole other turn, and then it just seems odd for me to say it out loud. But what I know now is that that's just my brain's way of processing information. And so I'll try now to, even if it's out of sequence of the conversation, I will try by the end of the meeting to say, circling back to that issue, I wanted to make this point. But if I don't, I try to cut myself some slack now, because I just do realize that my introverted brain needs time to process what I think. So I'll follow up with an email, and I won't embarrass a person over email, but if I feel like I need to say something right to that individual, I'll do it over email or call them. So I've learned that it's okay not to always say things perfectly right in the moment.
That's awesome. You also wrote a second book, which is Untangling Fear in Lawyering. That one, I'm assuming you wrote after the one we were just talking about?
Yes, that's this one.
Yeah, that one. I love the cover of that one. You have the box of gloves, and I like to look at that cover and interpret it as, the laces of the gloves is the fear, And once you untangle it, you have the power. You have the, you know, the boxing gloves give you that power. That's how I interpret it. Tell us a little bit about the book, please.
I love that you like the cover. That was really important to me as well with this process. So as I was going around talking about the introversion book, I would have people come up to me sometimes after the talks or email me or write me over LinkedIn and say, look, I'm not really an introvert. But I'm scared. I'm scared to disagree with the senior partner at the firm, or I'm afraid to present bad news to the client, or I'm afraid to object in a deposition because I have this scary opposing counsel, or whatever the scenario was. So I was hearing from a lot of people that while they could relate to some of the stuff in the introversion book, it was this concept of fear that was really their obstacle or barrier to enjoying their law practice. So being a person who has had a lot of fear in my life, I started researching the science of fear. And it kind of, when I was starting to get the nugget of an idea for this new book, I had also just started taking boxing lessons. So in New York City, I walked into this old school boxing gym in downtown Manhattan one day, and I was terrified. But I had always liked boxing. I just always have. Even as a kid, I liked boxing, watching it on TV. And I walked in and I was very nervous and very afraid, but then I started working with this trainer one-on-one, and all the fear went away. I just knew that I was going to be terrible at it, and I was going to turn red and be sweaty, and I was older than a lot of people in the gym, and it was, who cares? Who cares? I'm here. I'm trying. And so I was writing the book the whole time. I was sort of developing as this novice fighter, even though I'm not really a fighter, but you know what I mean. And so that there's a lot of themes throughout the book about untangling fear, not just facing it, or not just conquering it, or barreling through it, or I kept seeing on Instagram all these things like, just get up every day and do something that scares you. And I was like, no. I just didn't think that we should have to grow up, you know, get up every day and be terrified. So I sort of used the boxing journey as my writing journey too, while I was writing that book. And then I love the idea of tangling and untangling our fear. And then you're right, it just kind of led into the book cover with the tangled red laces and then the gloves at the bottom.
Yeah, it's a great cover. I really do like it. And I'm sorry to say this, but if I had to read either one of your books, I would choose the second one, just based on the cover. But by the way, for all the listeners out there and the viewers, we are going to have links to the books, so you guys will be able to purchase it and see it for yourself. They're great books, by the way. And then you wrote two other books that are not really related to this, but if you want to talk about them, I'd love to hear about them. You teach legal writing, and that in itself is a whole different area. Why did you, well, I kind of answered my question. I was going to ask, why did you write those? But I know you teach that. That's why you wrote those. But why did you feel the need to write those?
So those two books I actually wrote before. I'm trying to think of the timing. I wrote those books before the introversion book.
Oh, I thought they were afterwards. Okay.
No, so they were actually so about 10 years ago, I wrote a book called Fundamentals of Federal Litigation. It's out of print now, but that was my very first book. So then when I had been teaching legal writing for a while, I just decided I wanted to put everything that I've learned about being a legal writing teacher into a book that anybody could really, if they're sort of, actually the fear issue pops up, people that are sort of afraid of writing or think they're not a good writer. So often I get students who are 1L law students, first year law students, and they come to me and they say, I hate writing, or I can't write. My English teachers in high school or college told me I'm a terrible writer. So how am I gonna do this? I'm like, okay, we're gonna start from step one. So those books, they're called The Mindful Legal Writer. One's on predictive legal writing, which is what I teach in the fall semester, objective analysis. And the second one is on persuasive legal writing. And then that publisher put the two books together. So there actually is a version where it's all one book. And it's called The Mindful Legal Writer because I was trying to think of a way to make legal writing sort of this this slower process where we can think, because everything's so fast in our lives and in our profession, and it's like go go go. So my writing books were just sort of like, let's slow this down, let's break it down into really incremental steps. But while I was writing those books, I was obsessing about the introversion concept. So I have to say, like, writing the writing books was fine, but when I started writing the introversion book, I was so happy as a writer. I just knew that that's the type of stuff that I need to write, honestly, for the rest of my life. So the introversion book came next, then the fear book, and I sort of have an idea for a new one that's percolating.
Oh, that's interesting. Are we gonna be the first to have you reveal that?
I don't know exactly what the title's going to be yet, but I just wrote a little short article for the ABA Journal about sort of taking techniques from athletes, again, sort of the boxing theme, but I'm really intrigued by coaching and sports psychology and how athletes and also for people who aren't in the sports, so the other analogy would be like stage performers. Like I like music, so I go to a lot of concerts, and I always wonder, how do these musicians, it's not just that the athletes and the musicians and the performers focus just on the skill that makes them good on the stage or in the arena or the sports stadium. Their coaches are also caring about their mental well-being, their physical well-being, obviously, if they're athletes. So I've been trying to percolate this idea about taking training that athletes do and that performers do and applying that to our lives as law students and lawyers. So it's, as you can tell, it's not totally formulated yet, but
I love that concept and idea, and like a trial coach, but an actual that opens up a whole new field of employment in our field. I would love to be the first first coach like that. But yeah, I really am fascinated with athletes. You know, that chip on their shoulder, how it makes them perform, and I think I like to see myself something like that when I'm walking into court for trial, where I'm going in and it's you know, that's my arena, and I'm there to perform and be at my best. So I really love the concept. Now let me ask you this. I was going to ask you this, but then I started talking about something else. How therapeutic was it for you to write the books? When I say therapeutic, I mean helping you with your fear of public speaking.
incredibly therapeutic. There's no way I could do what I do now if I had not written these books. Because before I wrote them, I mean, I would do presentations at legal conferences and things, but outside of my classroom where I do feel comfortable, I still got incredibly nervous. I get nervous speaking at a faculty meeting. It's like 40 faculty members. It's ridiculous. So the therapy that I went through in writing the book, researching too, because I like reading other people's work and learning from actual scientists about this stuff, because I am definitely not a scientist. It was so therapeutic, and it really helped me realize I can do all the things that I always thought I wasn't cut out to do. So it's changed my entire way that I approach really everything in my life. I like now when I get an email from people saying, hey, come talk to us about your books, I get really excited. And then I get really nervous on the day of again, but I know I can do it. So that was a long-winded answer, but the therapy of writing the book was life-changing. And that's why I kind of feel like now a little agitated, because I don't have a project that every morning I wake up and I'm like, okay, let's see where this takes me today. So I'm looking forward to getting the next round of therapy going.
So sort of your goal of writing another book is sort of selfish, for a lack of better terms, because you need that therapy.
Yes, absolutely. It's definitely selfish. I have to
Nothing.
teach myself before I can help somebody else.
That's awesome. That's great. If you could do me a favor, send me the link to that ABA journal article you wrote, so we can put it up for the viewers and the listeners, so they can read it. I really enjoyed our talk. I know you're a very busy person, and thank you for agreeing to be on the show with me. Again, your two books, The Introverted Lawyer and Untangling Fear in Lawyering, awesome books. I'm very happy to have learned about them and actually read some of them. I haven't read all of them. It was a pleasure. And is there anything else you'd like the listeners or the viewers to know?
Thank you so much for having me. This has been very uplifting and motivating for me as well. I mean, you mentioned not reading all the books. The good thing about the books is you can read them in little kind of short snippets and then put them down and come back to them later. And then the ABA Journal article, but I'll send you the link. I think it's called "Let's Mend Our Profession by Tending to the Mental and the Physical." So it's like we can really heal and mend ourselves and the profession, but we got to start looking at like athletes do, like the mental and the physical. So I'll send it to you though. But thank you so much for this conversation, and we should continue the dialogue.
Thank you. Thank you. I appreciate it very much. And definitely, yes, we will continue the dialogue. I would love to have you on again after your next book, which I hope will be shortly. You have a great day. I know we are in different time zones, and I hope you keep safe during these crazy times. I know we didn't mention it, but everybody knows that this is not a normal time for everybody. And I know you're in the epicenter, so keep safe.
Thank you. You too. It's so good to make human contact while we're all going through this, a lot of us by ourselves. So I appreciate the opportunity.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you.